Hello there and welcome to the Weather Studio Live. It's 1 p.m, it's Tuesday and I'm Clare.
And I'm Alex Deakin. It's the 10th of September, which is statistically important. More on that in just a moment. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Aidan's also here on the Weather Wall of Wisdom.
Hello, please do send in your questions, your comments, and we'll try our best to answer as many as possible throughout today's show. In fact, we've already had one question which I'm quite keen to answer because I suspect this is a question that will be on a lot of people's lips. If you've seen some of the overblown tabloid headlines this week, Nigel Clifford on YouTube has said, I heard from several sources, I think newspaper reports, that it's going to be a cold UK 2019-2020 winter. Is there any truth to this? Well, this information didn't come from the Met Office. It's not one of our long-range weather forecasts. Our weather forecasts go up to 1 month, and there's another thing that goes out for 3 months. It's not come from any of that, but it's actually come from originally a research paper that I had a quick look at earlier from UCL. Some scientists put together a long-range forecast, a very experimental thing that looks at the correlation between solar activity and the winds in the stratosphere above the equator. And it looks at what they're doing at the moment and tries to predict what the winds around the Northern Hemisphere will be doing around January, February. And to cut a long story short, what they have seen from past analyses of all these winds and the solar activity and how they interact with the Northern Hemisphere atmospheric flow and essentially what our winters end up being like, what they've seen is that when solar activity is in its current state and when the winds in the stratosphere above the equator are in their current state, then the following January and February, there's an increased chance that it will be colder than average. An increased chance, but not a guarantee. What they've essentially said is that there's a 57% chance that it will be the coldest winter since 2013. And the newspaper reports somehow have taken that relatively unexciting news and called it the coldest winter for 30 years. So yeah, there's a tiny smidgen of truth behind the headlines, but it's not a long-range forecast from the Met Office, and it's a probabilistic forecast, and it's very experimental. So that's where that's come from.
Right. Okay. So yes, don't believe everything you read in the papers. No. It's a bit too far ahead to be giving that kind of detail. But we
will be referencing the Beast from the East, which was last winter's cold spell, relative to something we are talking about today happening across the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes. Coming up in today's show, we are talking about something very rare in the Southern Hemisphere. We are also discussing the tropics, because this time last week they were very, very active and there was a lot going on. We'll be going through what happened to all of those storms. Obviously, Dorian made a lot of the headlines, but there were other storms that have occurred over recent days. And we'll be looking at UK weather, obviously, in quite a bit of detail, because some warmth could be returning, Claire.
Well, yes. I mean, someone's just messaging Alistair saying, are we in for an Indian summer? And this happens every year, doesn't it?
It's one of your particular favourites, isn't it, the Indian summer? Well, you love an Indian summer quote.
Well, when it happens, yes I do. But this is more extension of the summer months. So we're just into meteorological autumn, and there's a waft of warm air coming up, which will allow temperatures to rise. Indian summer is something slightly different.
Has to be later in the year.
Yeah,
has to be later in October and November. Yes. Yeah. So it's not in summer, but it's going to warm up and get a lot sunnier for most places through the weekend. Right. Speaking of warming up, let's get on with the show. Yes, well, we should have said we're live on YouTube, we're live on Facebook, we're live on Twitter. So however you're watching us, do send in your questions, and Aidan will try and answer more of them. If I were to show this graph in January or February, there would be a lot of very excited snowmantics around the UK. This is sudden stratospheric warming.
Whoa.
And it's happening.
Yes.
But not over the North Pole like we're used to. This is a graph over the South Pole. So high up in the atmosphere, over the South Pole, along the bottom there on the x-axis, that's the months of the year. The grey graph is the average temperature high up in the atmosphere, and the black line is what's happened this year. And in the past week, we have seen a spike, a big jump in the temperatures high up in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere above the South Pole. This is indication of sudden stratospheric warming happening.
And it's very rare in the south, isn't it, across the Southern Hemisphere? And obviously they're coming out of their winter months now. I spoke to Professor Adam Scaife earlier today. Now he is I'd say one of the experts in these global weather patterns that happen, particularly SSW, this sudden stratospheric warming. And he said for something like this to happen across Antarctica, it's about a 4% chance.
So there's only been 2 recorded examples of sudden stratospheric warming in the Southern Hemisphere in the past 60 years. They're pretty rare.
Whereas in the
Northern Hemisphere, they kind of happen every other year. In the Northern Hemisphere, we've talked about them a lot on this programme because they then influence things. This is high up in the atmosphere, but eventually it seeps down, influences things. And in the Northern Hemisphere, it's one of the triggers for the UK to see easterly winds in the winter, which increases the chance of snowfall.
Exactly. This is a very different setup though, because obviously the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere is a different distribution of land and sea, which means the repercussions are slightly different as well.
It's one of the reasons why they don't happen as frequently in the Southern Hemisphere, because of the distribution of land masses and jet streams.
Jet streams, there's less undulates, there's little perturbations going up into the stratosphere, which actually then weakens these really strong vortex winds.
So it's a rare event. What does it mean? Well, interestingly, it will have a knock-on effect on the weather on the other side of the planet. Let's zoom out and head down that way. Let's take a look at what may happen in Australia because of events. These are events high up in the atmosphere over the Antarctic, but they do affect things lower down. Eventually, a bit like when sudden stratospheric warming happens over the North Pole, it's a couple of weeks before, sometimes 3 weeks before the events come down through the atmosphere and affect the UK. It's a similar kind of lag in the Southern Hemisphere, and it affects something called the SAM.
Right. Okay.
You know what the SAM is?
Well, we were discussing it earlier.
We were discussing the SAM.
Right.
We did the Southern Annular Mode, which is one of the influencing things across of Australia's weather. And there's a really interesting video actually on the Bureau of Meteorology. They've made a little video about what the SAM is and how sudden stratospheric warming can affect the SAM. I'm going to try and demonstrate that now.
Okay.
With the pen, with the magical pen. So the winds in this part of the world tend to go like this. The roaring 40s, roaring 50s, the default wind is a westerly wind across southern Australia.
So it's similar to what we get, and it spawns depressions which move wet and windy weather across clip the southern part of Australia and New Zealand.
Absolutely. When sudden stratospheric warming happens in the Southern Hemisphere, and remember there's only been one example of this in the last 60 years, actually what happens is these westerly winds get shifted north. Something called a negative SAM, which means these winds get shifted further north, these westerly winds. Now that, as you can imagine, impacts southern parts of Victoria and Tasmania in particular, bringing more moisture and increases the rainfall. So in this zone here, it actually gets often wetter. But in this part of the world, Queensland and New South Wales, particularly northern parts of New South Wales, let's zoom in a little bit here, for them to get rain, you tend to need the winds to come in from the east because that's where all their water is. It's more tropical, and when they get a westerly wind, the winds dry out a lot. So actually what happens in this part of the world, for Brisbane and Sydney in particular, is it tends to be a lot drier and warmer than average. And that is what happened the last time there was sudden stratospheric warming. It was one of the worst droughts across that part of Australia. And it's been a very dry summer in that part of the world, so it could exacerbate that situation.
We don't need that either across Australia. They've got a horrendous drought last year, lots of wildfires, and they do need a bit of rain, but not down the far south, actually further north as well. So this is a concerning situation for impacts. Impacts of very high temperatures, drier air, but not only that, flooding across southern parts of Australia.
It increases the chance.
And Patagonia as well.
Yeah, it happens. It's a global it happens all the way around those southern 40s. So that's kind of the knock-on effect here. And this is the projection from the BOM, the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. Actually, this was what happened. This is looking down over the Arctic. This is the sudden stratospheric warming. And this year's event is expected to be a bit stronger than that.
Well, it's very interesting. In fact, we've just had an email from our friends at the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, and they'll be doing an interview with the Weather Snap podcast this week, talking about their concerns, what they think the impacts would be regionally and the SSW in general across the Southern Hemisphere. It's going to be a very interesting chat. Absolutely fascinating. Yes, it's a really area of ongoing research because they happen
every other year. In the Northern Hemisphere, we've got far more examples, so it's easier to draw conclusions from it. These things are pretty rare in the Southern
One other thing that Adam actually said, Professor Adam Scaife, was talking about the ozone across the Southern Hemisphere, and in fact we're expecting the ozone to thicken up a little bit during this time. It obviously gets quite thin, doesn't it?
So yeah, one of the positives of Southern Stratospheric warming, actually it helps to protect because there's more ozone, so you don't get as much of the harmful UV rays coming through in Australia through their spring and summer. So there is one positive aspect of Southern Stratospheric.
It's something we've been talking about here at Weather Studio Live before we went on air, and Aidan, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's something which we don't see very often, and yes, it's happening right now. Any more questions and comments?
Well, an interesting question from Chris Proto on Facebook. He's asked, and we were talking about this yesterday, weren't we? Does an SSW, Southern Stratospheric Warming, in the South Pole increase the chance then of a Southern Stratospheric Warming in the North Pole in winter? And is there any previous records of some sort of correlation? Now, I would have thought that given it's only happened twice before, it would be virtually impossible to derive a correlation and to see any. There's just not been enough occurrences to see an effect. But it will be interesting to see if we get one now. And given that we get one every other year typically, sometimes we get two in one winter, then yeah, it's a reasonably high chance we'll get one this winter, but not a guarantee. And the same, we're talking about how the same big waves in the planetary atmosphere that cause this to happen in the South Pole at this time of year, they could equally happen 6 months later and cause the same thing to happen again in the North Pole. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if it happens or not, but I guess it's too early to tell.
There's a really good video on our Learn About Weather channel on YouTube as well about the Northern Hemisphere Southern Stratospheric Warming, how that can affect the UK, so you can search for that.
There are a few problems on YouTube during this broadcast right now. I'm really sorry about that. Hopefully you'll get the presentation coming back at some point. I don't know what the problems are, but bear with us, if you can hear us, that is.
Yes. Right, so we talk about the tropics?
Yes, we can.
Because just less than a week ago, this was the satellite image, a global composite of the satellite across the tropics. Can't quite make out the lands too well there, but basically over here we've got Asia, and here's North America. So this is the Pacific, and there were 4 storms in the Pacific. Yeah. This was taken last Thursday, and then 2 in the Atlantic. Obviously Dorian grabbing all the headlines, but it was a very active time in the Pacific as well.
Yes, it absolutely was. So we had 7 tropical storms sort of traversing the tropical waters of the North Pacific and North Atlantic. Ling Ling was particularly potent, maximum winds around 90 miles an hour as it made landfall across North and South Korea. Faxai was even stronger than that. Typhoon Faxai, 130 miles an hour, made landfall over Japan, a huge amount.
Really hit Tokyo hard, Faxai.
Yes,
again, you didn't really hear much in the news about it, but Faxai did
a million people lost power.
A million people lost power. Winds gusts well over 100 miles an hour in the Tokyo area. So it was a really powerful storm there. It's only just kind of fizzling out at the moment.
Then we've got 12E, which actually was named as a Coney. It didn't last long, it dissipated. And then Juliet, here's Juliet there, just across the tropical waters of the Eastern Pacific.
That was a hurricane for a time, wasn't it? It didn't really affect much land.
No, it didn't do much. I think it passed over a small island. And then Fernand, ex-Fernand, which made landfall across northeastern parts of Mexico. It was more of a wet weather event. It caused quite a lot of flooding there. And then we all know about Dorian, don't we?
You see the eye of the storm there quite clear. So this was last Thursday, just as it was heading up to make landfall in the Carolinas, just clipped.
And actually, interesting enough, I mean, it was a Cat 5, sustained winds of 185 miles an hour. It did make landfall over Nova Scotia, but it was declared extratropical just before landfall. But even so, it's been the strongest hurricane to make landfall there since Juan in 2003. So it was a potent beast which actually tracked, even though it was very slow moving over Bahamas, travelling at 1 mile an hour. It has moved and really pushed up the eastern seaboard, hasn't it?
Gabrielle,
you tell us about Gabrielle.
Still in place, and this is still a tropical storm at the moment, but it is going through that transition in the next 24 hours, as we will see in a minute. Again, it's been milling around the Atlantic, not really affected too much, not been particularly powerful, but it is going to bring the UK a spell of wet weather and slightly warmer weather later this week, as we will see momentarily. Why? I said this at the start. Why is today significant in the Atlantic storm season?
I know.
Yeah, it's the peak. Statistically, the 10th of September is the peak storm season. in the Atlantic basin. So that is why today is, and ironically, today's the day when we're not going to have any storms. Once Gabrielle's gone extratropical later today, there won't be any storms.
Let's go back to our few problems with YouTube. Just to say, we do apologise. We have sent a message to say, why didn't you watch on Facebook or on Twitter? And obviously, we'll be posting the whole show on YouTube without all those issues with, interference later on.
If we can.
We can. Of course we can. We can do anything apart from obviously a live broadcast on YouTube. So I'm really sorry about any
technical. May not be our technical problem.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll find out what's gone on there.
Any more questions coming in, Aidan?
Let's see. Yes, we have had a question from David Keith Hammond on Facebook. He said, will we get any more heat southwest, southeast England? I think we'll be touching a bit more on that a bit later, because there are signs that it could warm up in a few days. Let's see, what other questions have we had? Someone else asking about heatwave in Somerset, Richard Clayton on Facebook.
But it won't be a heat wave. I said, well, I wouldn't say it won't be a heat wave. It's unlikely to be a heat wave, meet the criteria, because temperatures judged on, it has to be, in Somerset, would have to be 25 or 26 degrees for 3 days in a row. So unlikely at this stage, but it could be, because the heat wave criteria is set. The heat wave criteria don't change through the year, so the temperature is set throughout the year.
And Philip Matthew O'Malley on YouTube, he said, afternoon Claire, Aidan and Alex, with the active tropical storms in the Atlantic, will that disrupt the jet stream? And they do affect the jet stream in different ways, depending on how far they travel north and how exactly they interact with the jet stream and the shape of the jet stream. You can go two different ways, I guess. Some of these tropical storms, as we are seeing over the next couple of days, can get swept up by the North Atlantic jet stream and come our way as just typical areas of low pressure and bring us wind and rain. But sometimes they can shunt the jet stream further north, and the high humidity and the tropical warmth can then cover the UK. So they can bring us warmer and more settled weather. So it can go several ways depending on how they interact with each other.
We often talk about the jet stream, don't we, and the jet stream driving what's going on at the surface, but actually it's a two-way thing. The atmosphere is a three-dynamical system, and there's a lot of energy in these tropical storms. They go right the way up through the atmosphere, so they can interact with the jet stream in the same way the jet stream can interact with that. It's a chicken and egg thing.
What I know about today is better than yesterday for me.
Today is a lot better than yesterday. Let's zoom out though and have a look at the pressure pattern, because we've been talking about the tropics and the effect of the tropics, and actually we've got a couple of those old storms across the UK. This big area of low pressure heading its way up towards Iceland is what's left of Dorian. Now, it's a very, very different beast. As we go through the next sort of 12 hours or so, it heads up towards Iceland, and there are a lot of isobars on the chart there across the UK. It is going to get windier, and these weather fronts will bring some rain across the northwest, in particular this evening and overnight tonight. But the key thing about that, if we zoom out once more, put the pressure chart on, and I'm going to put the temperatures on. So the temperature of the air, really, you can see that this is what was next door towards Iceland, but now there's a lot of cool air involved in it. It has changed. It is not a system that's being driven by the warm oceans. That's a tropical system. That's how hurricanes get their energy. They suck it up from beneath. This is a typical low pressure system heading across the Atlantic, and it's being driven by the contrast. So the contrast between the cooler air and the warmer air to the south, that is what is fueling it, and that's why it's heading in and bringing wet and windy weather to Iceland. This system, however, down here, this is Gabrielle. Now, at the moment, it is still a tropical system, but as we go through this evening, so this is 1800 this evening, if I just scroll through the next sort of 24 hours or so, you can see how it's heading further north, is moving away from the warmer waters, and by this time tomorrow it is being now driven again by that contrast with the cooler conditions to the north of it, the warmer air to the south of it. So now it's become extra tropical. So in the next 24 hours, probably in the next 12 hours actually, this system Gabrielle is going to change. It's no longer a tropical system, it will just be an area of low pressure, and as we head towards the UK, the isobars kind of fall out of it, loses all its energy. It will still bring some warmth. And so actually, as well as bringing some rain, so this is Thursday, quite a bit of rain across Scotland again on Thursday as that system comes in, and some strong winds, but it will also bring some warmer air, so that by temperatures on Thursday across the south and southeast, where we see some sunshine, could get up to 24 degrees, say, on Thursday.
Actually, let's just go further south, because there's quite a lot of thunderstorm activity across the West Med as well, isn't there, at the moment? The trough is sort of extended down a little bit over the next few days, and yeah, we are getting some quite severe thunderstorms across this area here up into southern parts of France. If you're heading that way, stay tuned to the
Someone did ask a question about Ibiza, actually, concerned about the rainfall, and yeah, over the next week or so, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where we'll see the worst rainfall in that region, but certainly Ibiza is in the area where there could be some very active, very lively thunderstorms, flash flooding, hail, and in some places, you see where that circle is, that area of low pressure, some places around there, eastern parts of Spain, the Balearics, there's the risk of 100 to 150 millimetres of rainfall in a few hours. So that's
the jet stream. So the jet stream is driving south there across Spain, and it's that little trough which is pepping up the areas of low pressure. Interestingly, I'm going to show the jet stream out in the Atlantic because we often get tropical systems coming up, and when they get drawn into the jet stream, that's when they can be potentially dangerous across the UK and bring us really wet and windy weather. But just go through the sequence here. So this is Tuesday. The jet stream's to the north. It's taken Dorian to the north, but it never really picks up Gabrielle there to the south. Gabrielle always stays on the southern flank of the jet, which is why it never really intensifies. It never really gets going. It just stays to the south and kind of weakens. If it was just on the northern edge of that jet stream, it could have really picked it up and intensified it into quite a beast. And some of the computer models were suggesting that might happen last week, but thankfully it just looks like bringing a wet and windy spell. And then, here comes high pressure.
Well, for some of us,
here comes high pressure as we go into the weekend. So Friday, high pressure, settling things down, plenty of sunshine. More on these weather fronts further north in just a moment because things, not quite that clear cut perhaps, but high pressure moving in for most of the weekend. And higher temperatures on the way.
Aidan.
Christopher Jones, Facebook. Are we going to have cold weather soon? There have been a few chilly mornings recently, haven't there? But no sign of proper cold weather yet. We're only still in early September, of course. Actually, it's quite interesting how next week could develop, and we're going to talk more about next week in a moment. But no conclusive signs of cold weather. We'll chat more about next week
in just a moment. But now it's quiz time.
It's quiz time, ladies and gentlemen. And please play at home for a bit of fun. So this is because we were talking about the Southern Hemisphere.
Bit of fun at home. It's very competitive between Aidan. There's a trophy, right?
There is a trophy.
Better had they.
So Northern Hemisphere. This is north or south. There's 5 questions. First question I'm going to ask you is where is the highest temperature ever recorded in the world? You've got to say Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. That's the first part of that, and then we're going to go higher and lower. Do you ever play higher and lower?
Never.
No.
Yes.
So
I'm going to say Northern Hemisphere.
Okay.
Is that what we're supposed to say? Yeah.
Okay.
So Northern Hemisphere, the highest temperature ever recorded. And this is temperature ever recorded in an official site.
Yes. Registered by, recognised by
the WMO, World Meteorological Organization.
Okay.
North or south, Aidan?
Okay, Aidan, give us a number.
Say higher or lower?
No, you say north or south first.
Yes, north.
North, okay, give us a number. How high was that temperature?
56.7 Celsius.
Wow, very precise.
Okay, right, this game's not going to work if you're going to be that clever. Yes, it was actually indefinite.
Whoa, I don't get a choice.
It's right. There's no point. It was spot on.
Oh, it's almost as if you'd seen the question before.
This is working really well, Jack.
Done a bit of research,
Death Valley in Northern Hemisphere reached a temperature of 56.7 degrees Celsius, July the 10th, 1913. The highest temperature ever recorded.
Is he disqualified now?
No, he's not disqualified.
I won.
No, there's 4 more questions. Okay, next one.
Next question. Question 2.
Strongest jet stream, Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere? Aidan.
That's got to be the Southern Hemisphere. Is this the fastest speed ever recorded in a jet stream? Is that what you're...
Yeah, no, just which has the strongest jet stream over a year?
Let's go with the south.
Oh, right, so it's the average.
Yeah.
I'll go south as well.
That's absolutely right, and that's because Antarctica has a huge mass of very, very cold air, which stays much colder than the North Pole in its summer, and that's the difference between temperature between the tropics and the pole, which gives us the strength of the jet. So it's the temperature gradient in effect. Right, secondary question. I need a number now, chaps. I need a number.
Right.
Okay, so the strongest... No, here we go. Antarctica. Okay, how much fresh water is locked up in ice across Antarctica in a percentage?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
And how is it linked to the jet stream?
Well, it's because we're talking about Antarctica giving a mass, and the ice actually keeps the temperature gradient.
I'm buying some time here while I think.
Right. Give us a number.
65.
Right. He said 65. You're going higher or lower, Aidan?
Higher or lower?
Higher.
Okay. You're wrong. 61%. Greenland adds to the other total, making up to about 99%. But if we lost all the ice across Antarctica, the sea level would rise by 58 metres. It's amazing, isn't it?
Across the globe?
Across the globe.
58 metres?
Yeah, 58. If we lost all the ice across the world, we'd see sea level rise of around 70 metres. Number 3, lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth. Who's going northern or southern?
I'll go Northern Hemisphere.
No, come on, think about it. Lowest temperature ever recorded.
Well, don't give him help. He said Northern Hemisphere.
Okay.
I'm going with Southern Hemisphere. Vostok, -89.
Yes, I know. Higher or lower?
-89?
Yeah, higher or lower.
He's looked it up, hasn't he? So he's
I haven't
probably
looked it
bang
up.
on again.
Higher or lower? -89.
I'll go lower.
Yes, lower. You're absolutely right. It's -89.2 degrees Celsius, measured in Vostok in 1983. We're almost there. Number
Almost
4.
there.
I hope you're playing at home. Okay. Number of sheep in a country. The most number of sheep in a country, Northern Hemisphere or Southern
Hemisphere. The most number of sheep. What?
Okay.
I'm going to go southern.
Okay. What are you going to do, Aidan?
Go Northern Hemisphere.
It's Northern Hemisphere. Which country is it?
Is it the UK?
No, Alex.
What? What? We're doing how many sheep, aren't we? Not which country.
Okay. It's China. How many sheep?
Oh, I thought it was sheep per capita.
No.
I thought it was sheep per capita because that's New Zealand.
How many sheep are there in China? Give me a number.
17 million.
No. Higher or lower, Aidan?
Higher.
146.5 million. Can you believe that?
Did you say higher or lower?
Yeah. I'm talking about that because actually I thought you'd say Australia or New Zealand.
Well, I thought it was New Zealand.
Yeah,
per capita.
exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, final one, ladies and gentlemen. Final one.
Back to weather, not farm animals.
Okay, right. The highest wind ever recorded, which wasn't a tornado. Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere?
Northern.
Okay,
I'm going to go Northern Hemisphere as well.
No, it's Southern Hemisphere.
Oh.
Okay, it was recorded on Barrow Island in Australia in 1996, and there was a wind gust of what number? Aidan, give me a number.
260 miles per hour.
Higher or lower?
Lower.
Just 7 knots lower, 7 miles an hour lower. 253. There we go. We learned a lot today about extremes in the north and the southern hemisphere.
And we have. That was a great quiz.
Was that good though?
Just to clarify, who won?
I think everyone's a winner in this game.
No one won.
Let's talk about the weekend ahead because actually a lot of winners.
I see what you've done there. That is a good link. Let's have a look at what's going on into the weekend. We will, of course, have more on this in the 10-day trend tomorrow. But yeah, Friday, we saw earlier, high pressure moving in. Most places that's going to be dry and fine and sunny. Could be a bit foggy in the mornings, particularly close to the centre of the high, bringing up some warmer, moisture air. So that means it's easier for things to condense out. So the nights could be a little bit foggy. It won't be as cold as it was at the weekends last weekend, but there will be big diurnal range. It'll still be chilly at nights, perhaps not quite as cold as last weekend, but the days will be warmer. So there'll be a big diurnal range. High pressure, sunshine for most. The big question mark as we just run through into the start of the week and just see those weather fronts. I'm just going to scroll back and forth. Those weather fronts and the isobars quite closely packed there across Scotland. So in Scotland in particular, there is the likelihood that these weather fronts will bring a bit of rain, a bit more cloud. It's further south where we're going to see plenty of sunshine this weekend. But the big question mark is how far north, how far south those weather fronts are going to be. And why is there a question mark? Well, it's all to do with the jet stream. So let's zoom out over here, put the jet stream on. And this big dip, see this big drop down there and lifting back up? This is a trough which is developing over the next couple of days, and it's that trough which is driving that low pressure system up towards Iceland and the effects of the weather fronts across Scotland. Now, Nick Silkston, who was on the show last week, and Matt Lewis was on overnight upstairs in the guidance unit. There's been a lot of research about tracking back and what develops this trough. And it was really interesting in the morning brief, interactions with a little feature over the North Pole at the moment and another trough over in America, North America, and how they end up developing this trough and the extent of that trough. And why is that important? Well, just a subtle shift in the jet means a subtle shift in that area of low pressure. So let's go back to drawing, because I like drawing. If the jet stream is just a little bit further south, like this, then that means that the low pressure system will be further south, and the weather fronts will be further south as well, and the high will get shifted. So just a subtle shift in that would shift the weather pattern across the UK.
I like that, yeah.
And the opposite is true, of course, as well. So if the jet stream is just a little bit further north, like this, then the low itself would be further north, and then the high would be further north as well. So it's a really subtle shift in the position of that jet stream, which is a lot of complicated interactions going on, is the difference between where the high and the low pressure sit. So if the jet stream is just that little bit further south, the low pressure comes further south, and more of Scotland will see the wet and windy weather, and less of the UK will see the high pressure. If it's further north, and the high gets shifted north, and the red there, and more of the UK will see the settled weather this weekend. So that's the big question mark.
So what's the likelihood at the moment? Where are the solutions sitting?
The more likely scenario is the one that we showed with the jet stream. Let's just take all that graffiti off. This is the most likely scenario, with the high pressure dominating over England, Wales, and probably Northern Ireland too, but parts of Scotland, particularly the Highlands, seeing the wet and the windy weather. But yesterday the computer models were shifting them all a little bit.
And interestingly enough, even though we'll have light winds here, it could turn very gusty across the eastern parts of Scotland, northeast England, sort of lee gustiness with quite a stable air mass, but that air mass will sort of hit the higher ground and become quite turbulent on its lee. So yes,
so this is the picture for Sunday. You can see there's lots of isobars on the chart, and those winds coming up, hitting the mountains across Scotland. You're going to get some strong gusts of wind on the eastern side. Temperatures, well, these are temperatures for Sunday morning, but they could by Sunday afternoon get up to 24, 25 degrees across the southeast on Sunday. Temperatures could really rise, probably sticking around into Monday as well.
Actually, eastern Scotland, northeast England probably doing quite well as well with the wind direction.
Yeah, but they will have some gusty winds.
Obviously, we'll keep you posted here. The 10-day trend tomorrow will be presented by
me. I'm doing
Alex.
I feel like I haven't done it for a while.
And this is a hint of something you'll be talking about tomorrow, Alex.
Yeah, so the key players into next week, that area of high pressure, yes, that's moving in. Pretty confident that vast majority we're going to have a dry weekend. High pressure looks like hanging on into the early part of next week, but the position of the high is key, and that's shown here with these two pictures. So you can just make out the high. So this is the European computer model. High pressure still sitting over the UK, and with the high sitting just to the east or southeast, there is a potential to tap into some of this warm air. So it could get pretty warm through the early part of next week if the highs shifted that way and we get southeasterly winds. This is the European model, but if I just show you GFS, which is the American model, it's kind of the same setup, that high pressure is dominating now to the west of the UK. So again, most places dry, but the shift in high pressure means that's allowing cooler air to come down from the north. So the big question mark about early next week in particular is whether it's a warm high or a cool high. And as I say, I'll have more on that in the 10-day trend
I think that probably
tomorrow.
answers Christopher Jones's question on Facebook. Another one for you, Aidan. Jared Doherty. You're not very accurate with your predictions, are you?
Is he talking about us specifically, or the Met Office? I
or
wonder.
The computer
we need
models.
more details. Yeah, and what is there a specific example of a weather forecast that wasn't accurate?
I mean, you know, solutions do waver, don't they? They go from one to another sometimes, particularly when there's a lot to play for ahead of time. This is 4 or 5 days. And obviously lots of perturbations in the flow at the moment, which we've talked about earlier, do actually add slight differences. It's only 50 miles or so, but as an island, we're, you know, only 900 miles north to south. So it does have a marked effect on just slight differences in the forecast and how that plays out.
But you know, we're improving all the time, and if you look back 30 years ago, the accuracy now of our 5-day forecast is as good as the accuracy 30 years ago of our 1-day forecast. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, a lot of the time people look at their apps and just see one weather symbol and not even necessarily the Met Office app. Sometimes it's other people's apps and just assume that it's the Met Office data as well. And that's not the best way to do weather forecasts.
No, look at the Met Office app, watch the video, and you'll get the full context of the weather, the uncertainties in any of the particular weather patterns that are predicted over the next few days, and a description of what could happen and what the relative likelihood of in a much more succinct way than I've just described it there.
But you are on the app this afternoon. That will be you describing it.
So thank you very much for watching. Remember, 10-day trend tomorrow, and then we've got the weather snap that's coming out on Thursday. More update on the SSW across the Southern Hemisphere, as well as lots of other stuff going on as well. And thank you very much to Simon Potts, Amy Louise Hughes, Hannah Garfield, Richard Nightingale, Laura Emmons, and Lee Schofield, who all played along at home with our higher or lower game.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do follow us across social media for the very latest updates. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next week.
Yeah.